It began where no one expected, a creature from distant forests, released under the Sahel's merciless sun, not for a zoo, not for spectacle, but to rescue a nation. Picture it: wooden crates, lined in rows, opened by local hands, and out-modeled beavers. In Burkina Faso. It sounds like fiction, but it wasn't. For generations, water here was not a resource, it was a weapon. A mother walked 8 miles to fill a tin basin. A father traded livestock for a week's supply. A child drank from a green puddle, praying it wouldn't make him sick. In these lands, thirst was not seasonal, it was systemic. And then came Captain Ibrahim Traoré, told the copyright, not with a foreign loan or imported pipeline, but with an unthinkable idea: let nature fight for us. Beavers, rodents, builders, he brought them here not as saviors, but as partners, to reshape the flow, to rewrite the future. Stay with USA, because this isn't just another story, it's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and join us for an Africa that no longer bows its head. There are places where water is taken for granted, faucets run, gardens bloom, showers wash away the dust of the day. And then, there is the Sahel, a land where rain is a rumor, and thirst a constant companion. Burkina Faso, once called Upper Volta, is a nation carved between extremes. 9 months of sun so fierce it cracks the ground like broken clay, then a brief season of storms, wild and fast, as if the sky regrets its silence. But too often, the water comes too late, or too little. Over the last 50 years, the Sahel has lost over 20% of its surface water, according to the African Development Bank. That is not just a statistic, it is an imagery of life, of livelihood, of hope. In this dry, defiant land, entire villages have withered. Mothers walk miles for water, cattle collapse in barren fields, wells once sacred run dry. And still, the world offers solutions wrapped in contracts, interest rates, and imported machines. But in 2022, something shifted. A young captain named Ibrahim Traoré, the copyright, barely in his 30s, stood before his nation and announced a vision few dare to imagine: an artificial river, built not by foreign contractors, but by the hands of the Burkina Faso people. It wasn't just a construction plan, it was a declaration, a refusal to beg, a decision to build. Within months, the work began. Soldiers turned engineers dug deep into the Sahel's hard soil. Villagers volunteered to carry stone, mix cement, clear brush. The river wasn't just infrastructure, it was a movement, a line drawn in the sand between dependency and dignity. Channels extended for hundreds of kilometers. The design was simple: to catch and store seasonal rains before they vanished into dust. And at first, it worked. Crops were planted again, cattle drank freely, children splashed in water they had never seen flowing before. The captain's message was clear: if we cannot control our water, we cannot control our future. And across the land, hope stirred. But nature, like revolution, is not easily tamed. By the end of the first year, problems emerged. Silt accumulated, debris choked the channels, pools stagnated, the miracle turned murky, mosquitoes multiplied, fish vanished. The river that once flowed with promise began to rot under the sun. And here came the test. The obvious solution, the one every consultant would propose, was clear: dredging machines, pumps, imported filters, chemical treatments, expensive, complex, and utterly dependent on foreign suppliers. But Traoré, the copyright, had sworn an oath not just to defend his people, but to liberate them from dependency. Captain Ibrahim's latest news headlines had once hailed him a disruptor. Now, they watched, waiting for his next move. Instead of turning to Europe or America, he turned to nature. He gathered local scientists, ecologists, and elders. He asked a question no one had dared: can the land heal itself? And the answer came, not from high-tech labs, but from biology. Beavers, yes, beavers are the flat-tailed, branch-hoarding rodents native to forests far from Africa. Known to scientists as ecosystem engineers, these creatures possess an instinctual genius. They build dams, slow water, trap sediment, and create entire wetlands. In North America, their impact is legendary. Streams managed by beavers host up to 85% more biodiversity than those without. In Europe, they've revived rivers once declared dead. But could they work here, in the Sahel? In the sun-baked scar of Earth? For Traoré tilde copyright, the question wasn't absurd, it was necessary. Because what Burkina Faso needed wasn't just a river, it needed a living system, one that didn't rely on fuel, parts, or loans, one that could sustain itself long after politicians and donors moved on. So, against all advice, he placed his bet on nature, not with fanfare or fireworks, but with wooden crates and a quiet kind of hope. The artificial river was never meant to imitate Europe, it was meant to defy it. The decision was so strange, so unexpected, that even Traoré tilde copyright's closest advisors hesitated to speak it aloud. Beavers? The word hung in the air like a challenge. In the scorching heart of West Africa, where sandstorms could blind a man and a heat could buckle steel, the idea of importing soft-furred creatures from temperate forests felt like a fantasy. To critics, it was laughable. To the captain, it was logic, because the problem wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. Machines need fuel, filters need chemicals, dredgers need spare parts, maintenance contracts, and electricity, all of which came from abroad, all of which cost money. Burkina Faso did not have or refused to spend in dependency, but nature offered a different model, one of persistence, elegance, and self-sufficiency. The beaver. For centuries, beavers have shaped landscapes without instruction. They dam rivers using logs, mud, and instinct. Their structures slow water, preventing erosion, allowing sediment to settle safely, and creating diverse wetland habitats. These wetlands not only store moisture but filter pollutants, support aquatic life, and regulate temperature. In short, they do what machines claim to do without cost, contracts, or carbon. In North America, beaver-modified streams increase biodiversity by as much as 85%. In Europe, reintroduced populations have restored rivers long thought dead. The science was sound, the results, measurable, and yet, in the Sahel, it felt absurd. But revolution often does until it works. Traoré tilde copyright moved forward. Hundreds of beavers were sourced from cold climates. Canadian scientists were consulted to oversee transport and adaptation. Custom-built crates kept them safe during the journey. Veterinary teams monitored their health. It was a logistical ballet, done with military precision. The backlash was swift. Foreign media outlets mocked the idea. Burkina Faso's president placed Noah in the desert, one French tabloid sneered. A German columnist wrote that the rodents will die, and so will his reputation. Domestically, the opposition found new ammunition. They framed the project as a waste of resources, an insult to Burkina Faso's traditions. Radio hosts, fed by quiet hands, called it the circus. We need tractors, not tail flappers, one commentator said. But the crates kept coming. On a clear morning, beneath a pale blue sky, villagers gathered near the banks of the artificial river. Soldiers stood watch, engineers checked the flow. A quiet tension lingered. And then the cages were opened. One by one, the beavers slid into the water. No speeches, no ceremonies, just ripples, tails, and a gentle splash of movement. For the first few weeks, they vanished into silence. No one was sure they'd survived. A few were seen at dawn, gnawing branches. A farmer caught one dragging twigs across a muddy slope, but the real evidence came later. By the second month, changes appeared. Where water had once stagnated, it now moved in soft trickles. Small pools formed behind primitive dams. Sediment gathered harmlessly instead of clogging main channels. Algae declined. Mosquitoes thinned. Then came the fish. Little flashes of silver darted through new channels. Frogs followed. Dragonflies zipped across the surface. Birds and herons, kingfishers returned to hunt. Grass thickened on the banks. Soil held firm. The beavers were working, and their work rippled outward. For farmers, it meant crops grew taller. For herders, cattle drank clean. For children, the river was no longer a cautionary tale, but a classroom. Schools taught about the engineers in fur. Artisans carved beaver shapes into wood. One village painted its water tank with the mural of a beaver building a dam. This wasn't just biology, it was myth in the making. And for Captain Traoré tilde copyright, it was vindication. He had not brought a foreign animal to replace African knowledge. He had invited nature to partner with it. He had not chosen beavers for spectacle, but for strategy. And the world began to know this. Environmental scientists from Finland and Ghana requested access to study the results. Peer-reviewed journals reached out for data. And slowly, the ridicule waned. Still, Traoré tilde copyright remained silent. No parades, no declarations, just one quiet sentence, spoken to a group of visiting youth volunteers. They work without pay, without fuel, without politics. That is why they are dangerous to those who profit from failure. Not all revolutions are greeted with applause. Some are met with silence, others with bullets. The artificial river, once a source of cautious hope, soon became a battleground, not of ideologies, but of economics. For decades, water scarcity in Burkina Faso had created an invisible empire built on bottled imports, diesel pumps, foreign filtration plants, and corrupt supply chains. A web of cartels, contractors, and foreign partners had grown fat on the suffering of the people. And now, that empire was under threat. The first attack was small, a pump, gone missing. Then, sacks of cement were found ripped open and ruined by the rain. A shipment of steel pipes from Ghana vanished without a trace. The incidents were too targeted, too frequent, to be coincidence. A captured informant later confessed, "If this river works, their business dies." And they are ready to kill for it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré tilde copyright responded with steel. Soldiers were deployed along the construction routes. Watchtowers rose, but the sabotage only grew more brazen. One night, a team of engineers returning from a late inspection was ambushed. 2 were wounded. In another incident, during an early storm, a young soldier drowned while reinforcing a floodgate. His Namia Alisania became the whispered vow in the village that buried him. This river will flow, because he fell. But even blood could not halt the sabotage. The sabotage spread to the beavers. Their holding pens were raided. Several animals disappeared. Others were found dead or poisoned. Too many villagers. The beaver had been a mystery. Now, it was a martyr. And still, the project endured, because beneath the fear, something deeper was awakening. Belief. In village after village, community patrols sprang up, and not from orders, but from instinct. Mothers who had once carried basins of dirty water began carrying radios. Teenagers set up night shifts near the dams. Elderly men too old to work the fields became watchmen, posted along the canal. They called themselves lay guardians till the water guardians, armed with flashlights, smartphones, and an unshakable sense of duty. They became the eyes of the river. They filmed, recorded, posted, and the world began to see what official channels would not report. One video, captured by a 13-year-old boy, showed a beaver gnawing through a branch during a thunderstorm or rebuilding its dam in the pouring rain. The caption read, "Nature fights for us, why don't we fight for her?" It was shared over 2 million times in 72 hours. Then came the hashtags, #KeniRiver, #BeaverBuilders, #WaterWarriors. Suddenly, the story was no longer buried in local radio, it was viral. African diaspora communities in Paris, New York, and Johannesburg organized rallies. Images of the artificial river appeared on posters, alongside Traoré copyright's profile and the silhouette of a beaver. A new chant was born in the streets, "Our land, our water, our way." But while the world cheered, the resistance hardened. Local media stations faced threats. One radio station in Ouagadougou lost its license a week after airing an interview with a farmer who praised the beaver's work. Official explanation: technical violations. The real reason: truth. Even community reporters were followed by unmarked vehicles. Anonymous messages flooded inboxes. "Stop filming. Delete the videos. This is bigger than you." Yet, the people kept filming, because in the end, the river could not lie. Its clarity spoke louder than any rumor. Its fish outshone any propaganda. Its flow could not be silenced, and neither could its guardians. In a gathering under moonlight, Traoré copyright met with water guardian leaders. He didn't promise protection, he offered gratitude. "They fear us, not because we fight them, but because we've stopped needing them." Today, every dam built by a beaver is more than wood and mud. It is a monument to sacrifice, to defiance, and to the stubborn will of a people who chose water over silence. Thy pound if you believe this is what Africa needed all along. Say amen in the comments below. In the beginning, the world laughed. French tabloids called it Disneyland in the desert. A British anchor chuckled on air. Burkina Faso swaps bulldozers for beavers. In Washington, a well-funded think tank labeled the plan unscientific, risky, and propaganda disguised as policy. The message was clear: let the grown-ups handle development. But the river didn't care for headlines. While the West sneered, water moved. While experts doubted, ecosystems healed. And when the beavers went to work building, damming, balancing, it wasn't a spectacle. It was science, nature's version. By the second rainy season, the jokes dried up. That's when Burkina Faso latest news began appearing in unexpected places. Not in the scandal columns, but in scientific journals. Canadian ecologists published findings. The river's water clarity had improved by 72% in just 3 months. Ghanaian hydrologists confirmed fish populations had risen by over 38%. Ornithologists from Kenya documented the return of 14 bird species previously absent for decades. The data was undeniable. The ridicule faded. Now, it was curiosity. Delegations from Mali, Niger, and Benin arrived to study the system. Environmental ministries in Chad requested blueprints. African Union summits gave Traoré copyright a full session, and not to justify, but to teach. Suddenly, what had been mocked as madness was being repackaged as eco-innovation. The same voices that once questioned the project now scrambled to explain it, some even trying to claim it as their own. Sponsored articles emerged crediting vague international partnerships. Development agencies that hadn't lifted a finger now posted selfies beside beaver dams. But Burkina Faso remembered. They remembered the silence when the soldier drowned, the laughter when the beavers were released, the mockery when children carved rodents into wood with pride. And they knew what this shift really meant. They had succeeded, not with grants or guidance, but with vision and grit. In his first international interview after the river's second anniversary, President Ibrahim Traoré copyright was asked how he responded to the turnaround in global opinion. He smiled and said, We didn't build this to impress the West, we built it so our children wouldn't have to beg for water. That was the heart of it. This wasn't about optics, it was about sovereignty, and the world felt the weight of that word. For decades, development in Africa had followed a pattern. Western consultants write the plans, Western banks fund the loans, Western companies sell the machines, and when it all collapses, Western media blames African mismanagement. But the artificial river broke the cycle. There were no billion-dollar bids, no helicopter visits, no speeches in foreign accents. There was just earth, water, and will. And beavers. Yes, beavers, the creatures once foreign, now family. Their dams became shrines, not to the animals themselves, but to the idea that Africa could solve Africa's problems, not in 10 years, not with 10 degrees, but with 10 fingers and one fearless decision. Soon, across the continent, whispers became movements. In Senegal, a dry riverbed was surveyed for ecological rebuilding. In Ethiopia, local NGOs began discussions on native wetland restorations. In Tanzania, schoolchildren painted murals of rivers, not dams. Hope was growing, and not imported, but rooted, and with it, pride. Not the hollow pride of parades, but the deep pride of progress made by hand. A pride that says, we don't need permission to heal ourselves. In Burkina Faso, they no longer called it the artificial river. They called it La Rivière de l'Iris du Courage, the river of courage, because that's what it can. Not just science, not just sacrifice, but the bravery to try what had never been tried, to endure the laughter, the sabotage, the storms, and to trust that nature, when given the chance, would rise with them. At dawn, the river whispers, not with words but with motion. A ripple gliding past reeds, a beaver's splash near the far bank, the wings of a kingfisher cutting the morning mist. In Ouagadougou, children rise before school to touch the water, not out of ritual but reverence, because they know it was not always this way. Before the river came, there was only dust, the kind that chokes lungs and dreams. Mothers carried water as if it were gold. Farmers planted prayers in cracked soil, and children learned drought before they learned arithmetic. Now, they learn something else. In classrooms across Burkina Faso, ecology is no longer a foreign word. It is a national language. Textbooks include diagrams of beaver dams. Field trips take students to observe sediment flows. Young ones recite Captain Ibrahim's motto-like scripture. If we cannot control our water, we cannot control our future. That future is now being written in policy, not just poetry. To ensure the river endures, the government established a three-part long-term protection plan. First, community-based river watch units. Trained volunteers monitor water clarity, beaver activity, and biodiversity trends. With mobile apps and solar sensors, villagers send real-time reports to local councils. The guardianship once born out of desperation is now institutionalized. Second, school eco-programs. Every student, from primary to secondary, studies the science of the river. Not just facts but philosophy. They are taught not only how nature works but why it must be honored. Third, regional environmental pacts. Agreements with upstream and downstream villages prevent pollution, overuse, and encroachment. Water, once a source of conflict, is now a bridge of cooperation. But perhaps the greatest legacy is not structural, it is cultural. Burkina Faso has shifted how it defines strength, no longer measured in concrete tonnage or foreign investment but in ecological balance, community resilience, and local ingenuity. And this has changed the map. The Burkina model is now cited in African Union policy meetings. It features in environmental engineering courses from Nairobi to Copenhagen. UN forums discuss it not as an experiment but as a case study. In the latest update on Captain Ibrahim's latest news, the president was seen addressing a panel at the Pan-African Sustainable Development Summit not to seek aid, but to share solutions. The blueprint was simple and radical. 1. Use local biodiversity as infrastructure. 2. Train people to become stewards, not dependents. 3. Trust that nature is not an obstacle but an ally. It wasn't just the riverbanks that transformed. In nearby markets, fishmongers report booming stocks. In workshops, artisans craft wooden beaver figures as symbols of strength. Musicians write songs about the river that listens. Elders speak of the days before water flowed and how it returned. Economists now estimate that the river project increased regional food production by over 20%. It cut waterborne disease cases by a third, and it slashed costs in water purification by nearly 60% without burning a single drop of diesel. But these numbers tell only half the story. The real change is in the mirror, in how Burkina Faso sees itself, not as a recipient of help, but a giver of wisdom, not as a victim of climate, but a partner with nature, not as the subject of documentary but the author of its own doctrine. When asked by a foreign journalist whether the project was scalable to wealthier nations, President Traoré replied, "We did not build this for the world to follow, but if the world is wise, it will learn from us." The earth has always offered tools. We only had to open our hands. That is the essence of the river, not just water, but wake-up call. And in its flow, a message for every dry land, literal or spiritual. You do not need permission to rise. You only need the courage to begin. By its third year, the artificial river was no longer an experiment, it was evidence. In the early dawn of Ouagadougou, the river glistened alive with the movement of beavers, the flutter of birds, and the echoing laughter of children playing where dust once rained. For many, it was a miracle. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, it was a promise kept. "We didn't build a project," he said, "we built a future." And the future was taking shape. Environmentally, the transformation was undeniable. Biodiversity surged. Wetlands once choked by silt now teemed with frogs, insects, fish, and migratory birds. Native aquatic plants returned, anchoring the soil, filtering the water. Farmers no longer fought floods or droughts, so they adapted to a living system that balanced itself. Entire microclimates shifted. Economically, the river sparked a new rhythm. Fishing markets reopened. Agricultural yields rose. Villagers began crafting and selling beaver-related goods, wood carvings, educational books, even ecotourism tours. Some families who once fled the region returned, drawn by jobs in water. Socially, it rewired how people saw power. The project had not come from donors or deals, it had come from them. Built by Burkina-Faso's hands, defended by Burkina-Faso's hearts, inspired by a Burkina-Faso's mind. And so, the government moved to protect not just the water, but the idea. 3 pillars were set into law. 1. Community river watch units. Locals were trained to monitor water quality, track beaver health, and observe biodiversity changes. Not just guards, but scientists of the soil. 2. School eco-curricula. Every child now studied the river and not just its biology, but its history. The sabotage, the sacrifice, the silence. They learned the names of the fallen, the young soldier who drowned, the woman who died during a heat clean-up. The teachers called them water ancestors. 3. Cross-border environmental pacts. Agreements were signed with Mali, Ghana, NIDRA ensuring upstream and downstream cooperation. Because rivers don't respect borders, and neither does resilience, the beavers, meanwhile, thrived. Their dams grew more complex, their impact deeper. They weren't just creatures now, they were cultural figures. Songs were written, proverbs emerged. One said, "The beaver does not speak, but the river listens." And globally, the model became doctrine. At a United Nations Climate Forum, Burkina Faso was invited not to plead but to present a lecture titled, "Eco-Engineering Without Dependency." Traoré copyright as pictures stood beside charts showing success, not GDP gains but green fields, clean water, and community smiles. At an African Union gathering, a resolution was drafted to explore nature-based solutions as a primary response to environmental degradation. The opening line cited Captain Ibrahim latest news, but Traoré copyright never claimed credit. He declined awards, avoided podiums. In one of his few public addresses that year, he stood before villagers and said, "We did not win a war, we found peace with the land. That is the real victory." He warned that the work was not done. Climate would test them again. The cartels would not sleep. The media would still twist truth. But now, he said, we have a river, and a river never forgets, and neither did the people. They pledged to preserve it not through law, but through life. Farmers agreed to reduce runoff. Villagers planted native trees along feeder streams. Children named baby beavers after their grandparents. One girl, aged 9, told a visiting journalist, "My grandfather carried sand to dig this river. Now I carry his name." This is the Burkina Faso model. Not fast, not flashy, but lasting. A blueprint not written in ink but in water, mud, sweat, and blood. A story not made for cameras, but carved into the land. And maybe, just maybe, this is what revolution looks like now. The river flows now and not just through the heart of Burkina Faso, but through the memory of a people who dared to believe. It does not roar, it whispers. In every ripple, it tells the story of defiance, dignity, and rebirth. Once, this land cracked beneath the weight of drought and silence. Now, it sings with frogs, birds, children, and hope. This was never just a story about beavers, or canals, or water. It was a story about what happens when a nation stops waiting for rescue and begins building its own redemption. About a leader who shows risk over routine. Captain Ibrahim's latest news is not just about his presidency, it is about the legacy he's carved into the land. When foreign voices doubted, we listened to the earth. When contracts were waived, we held on to conscience. When systems failed, we turned to nature and nature turned toward us. And what we built was not only a river, but a blueprint for every forgotten place. A living argument that says, loudly and clearly, Africa can do it. Burkina Faso latest news is not buried in statistics. It is etched into the banks of a living waterway that filters, nourishes, and defies. Let others count profits. We count trees, fish, harvests, and laughter. Let others debate models. We walk alongside our answer. And when they ask us, who helped you build this? We point to the soil, the villagers, the beavers, the memory of the fallen, and say, they did. If this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe because they hid our history long enough. Let's speak our future out loud. Captain Ibrahim's latest news will fade one day, as all headlines do, but the river will remain, as proof, as promise, as prophecy. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear. Africa can do it.